Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Rowell and François.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. This is François. I'm here with Rowell. Hey Rowell, how are you?
I'm good. Hey François, how are you doing? I'm in a hotel in San Diego.
Awesome. So in South California, hopefully the weather is good with you.
Yeah, it's much better than most of the United States, which I guess is good. Was able to go to the beach and dip my feet in the water with no problem. So very fortunate.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, considering the rest of the country is pretty cold right now. I've seen that on the news, and they were blaming Canada. They're like, "Oh, they sent us."
Of course. Yeah, they just blame somebody else. That's usually how United States does it, right?
I think they're just joking, but I found it funny. It's still pretty cold here, which is unusual. Like usually we don't get that much snow and that much cold, so it's unusual, but people are, kind of taking advantage of it, and you see a lot more people doing winter sports this winter, so it's nice.
Okay, but it's still not preventing you from doing any work, right?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm crazy busy right now, and I'm guessing you're crazy busy too, so.
Yeah, like I was able to miss the Eastern snowstorm. I was in Pennsylvania to do AP on a stick, which we'll talk about in this episode. But once I left, the day after that, it really started to get bad. So now I went from cold weather to somewhat warmer weather, where I'm going to do another AP on a stick in Los Angeles.
So a lot of AP on a stick right now, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting. Only because I guess we'll talk about this in the episode of why we would do AP on a stick, but there's multiple reasons why. And for me, it's just mainly around the accuracy that we can build into a predictive survey.
Yeah, and I guess we didn't talk about this episode or the subject of this episode, but we wanted to approach, AP on a stick site surveys in warehouses or manufacturing environments. I mean, we've talked about AP on the stick on the show before, but lately both of us have been doing AP on the stick in warehouses, manufacturing environment, and we just wanted to share a little bit of our experience and share a little bit of what we do and why we do it, and so you guys can have, because sometimes we share stuff on social media and people ask us questions.
Yeah.
Like this week I was sharing like a picture of the Pelican case I use and the equipment I use, and people were asking me, what do you put in there? Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess we'll share the picture on the show notes, but yours is really clean and organized, right? So you have your little slots that you can put your access point and some other equipment in there, like accessories that go along with the tripod, and underneath that, what do you call it? The foam. You do have your tripod there. So yeah, that's why people were wondering, what do you have in there? Because all they can see is maybe like three things that are along the top.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was talking about that on Twitter this week, and I was saying the foam is the worst part of the Pelican case. I remember like cutting through the foams and trying to organize, and it took me a long time. And plus, the foam doesn't smell good when you purchase it from factory.
Yeah, it's art, right? To get that organized, you got to pre-plan it. You can't just start cutting and then assume it's going to be perfect when you're done. Because I went through the same thing, except my tripod it doesn't really collapse fully straight. It's not like a flat collapsible tripod. Mine kind of sticks out a bit because it has caster wheels. It's got some extra support on the base of the tripod, so one of the legs just kind of sticks out. So I had to do a cutout for that leg to stick out.
And that's one of the hardest one, because there's different layers of foam, so you would have to cut in between different layers.
Yeah, and if anyone uses Pelican, you know how expensive the foam can be if you want to replace it. And I'm getting to that point where I just need to do new foam, because I did cutouts for an access point, and I was bringing two to do an AP on a stick, because I needed to test two different designs that I was working on for a warehouse, where we wanted to look at just using the internal omnidirectional antennas, so just your standard AP, and then I needed an AP with the external connectors, so I had to bring two APs to test signal from an antenna. So I had to do new cutouts, and then of course with security here in the United States, TSA opened up my case and just kind of broke some of the foam, so now it's just all messed up. So one of the things to consider when you're doing AP on a stick is how you're going to transport your equipment, especially when you travel, right? So we both use the same Pelican case, and it's a fairly large Pelican case. So we can actually put a link to that if you're considering bringing and flying with your own tripod and other equipment that you might want to place in there.
Yeah, and that's why I bought it originally, is being able to fly with it and have it in a nice, neat, organized way. But now I just find myself using it even when I drive to site, because I can have all the equipment, and then I just have to carry my backpack. And in my backpack, I just bring my iPad and my laptop, and I'm able to put everything else inside the case. So when you arrive on site, you actually, you bring your backpack and the case, and then you're ready to work. So it's very neat.
Organized. Yeah, it's all contained in one container. It's, as long as you've planned how you're going to do your cutouts, it can be very organized. And then you have your equipment in there. Your if you use a Wi-Fi stand, you can have that slide into there as well. And it just depends how high you want your tripod to go and how collapsible it is. That's going to determine the size of your Pelican case, because you can go with smaller ones. If you're not going to go, I'm gonna say, if you're not going to go over maybe 14 feet, you could get away with either no Pelican case and just kind of use a plastic like cover, and then you just kind of carry that with you, which I find a hassle to be carrying that on an airplane and trying to figure out how you're going to fit that into a overhead compartment. So that's why I like the Pelican case, and the Pelican cases hold up to the damage that or the roughness of the employees that are handling it, right? So they don't just toss it. It can take a bit of a beating in the airport as they're putting it on a plane, putting it on a truck. It will stand up and be able to protect your equipment.
All right, let's talk about the couple of projects we've been working on, and then we'll, to give you guys a little bit of context, and then we'll start with answering the question, why do we do AP on a stick surveys? I guess I can start, Rowell. I worked on a couple of projects lately, but the one I guess I want to talk about here is I was doing design for a factory, a plant, and they're producing like stuff made out of metal. So you have it's pretty much like a warehouse, and in the warehouse you have different I guess sections where they do different things. So you can have sections where they deal with the raw material. Then you can have a section with machinery when they just they actually build the product out of metal. So it's a lot of machines that can deal with metal to create the product. And then they have like a warehouse sections where they actually put all of the finished product before it's shipped out. And then they have like all the sections like painting and offices and all of this. So it creates like this this complex environment, I guess, where the signal might not propagate the same way in those different environments. On top of having metal everywhere, I'm not even talking about the ceilings were like crowded with like cranes, pipes, trays, a whole bunch of things. So it was a very interesting environment for me or I guess challenging environment, because you cannot just place an AP and then call it a day. You have to study a little bit more what you're going to do in the environment. You have to study how the signal will propagate throughout the machinery, throughout the racks, and how it will, work with all the metal that's around there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so that's a product I was working on. What about you?
Mine, so I have two projects. One was a retail warehouse, a very large one, where they're just doing a refresh of access points. And so going to a new model, they wanted to understand, hey, how much of the existing drops can we use and just swap out access points? And if we do that, what is the signal going to look like for our devices? Excuse me. And then the other one that I have is an outdoor location, and they don't know where to place access points, right? Because it's outdoor. There's trees and all these other things that would attenuate the signal, so they don't know how many access points they need and where they're going to install it. And also knowing where they're going to install it determines where they're going to trench cabling somewhere, right? Fiber or power. So that's my other one is not necessarily like a warehouse, but it's just an outdoor location where predictive can be a lot more difficult to do, because I'm just dealing with outdoor space, but I'm not sure where the signal attenuation is going to occur.
Awesome. Okay, so that's really good examples. We have a mix of everything between your projects and mine. So we can approach different things. And the first question that pops to mind is, why do we do AP on the sticks for these environments?
Yeah, is predictive not good enough for this environment? That would be like the second part to that question, right? Because there could be a why, but then there could be also, well, why not just predictive?
Yeah, exactly. Why not just predictive? Why do we have to do an AP on a stick on top of the predictive? And I guess you kind of answered the question at the beginning, but we have different reasons why we would do it. I guess that in the workflow of how we work, the reason why we do an AP on a stick is to build like a better, accurate predictive model. So we would have our predictive model, and then we would go on site to take all of these measurements to refine our predictive model and make sure that our predictive model meets, the environment. And to do that, we have to go on site, do AP on the stick, and then gather all of that data that we can then later on feed back to the predictive model.
Yeah.
And the reason why we do this is because it's hard to predict how all of these different elements will attenuate the signals, how the racking will attenuate the signals, how the different levels in your retail warehouse example will attenuate the levels, the trees outside, the big machinery in a plant, all the metals. So that's hard to actually predict all of this in a predictive model. And something else that we don't do in the predictive model is, reflection and diffraction.
Yeah.
We don't really take that into account, so we want to measure it to kind of see what we're dealing with, and especially in environments where you have a lot of things that can reflect the signal, and which is pretty true in a warehouse in general.
Yeah, I would agree, because in a warehouse there's just a lot of metal in general, and it doesn't matter if it's like a manufacturing or even retail. I would say in the retail warehouse that I was in, there was so much metal everywhere due to like multi-level. So there could be a multi-level where that ceiling for whatever level you're on could reflect some of that signal back down. So even though you're dealing with a long aisle, the aisle can be a way for to shoot signal pretty straight down that aisle. So the signal would typically go a lot farther than you would expect, right? And maybe when you do a predictive, you're not sure if the predictive is 100%, it's not close to 100% accurate. So you want to measure that and see, and also seeing it, how well it goes through racks with inventory. So that depends also on the inventory that you have. And while Ekahau might have some baked in attenuation values for like warehouse racks. Like you don't know if it's 13 dB, 10 dB difference. So that's one of the things we measure. And then other things you may not even consider or know about in the warehouse when looking at some floor plans could be like one of the things I noticed was the conveyor belts and how many conveyor belts there were and at what level the conveyor belts were. And so knowing where you should place the access points at what height, that could determine also the propagation of that signal, right? So if I'm at 45 feet high, a signal might propagate very well throughout the space. But what does that look like for a scanner down at the floor 45 feet, right? After a signal tries to go through all that metal.
And I think that's a really good point because API on a stick also allow us to test different things. So like you said, we can test different heights, we can test different equipment, different external antennas. What I had to do in my case as well, because the environment was very busy, what I did while I was doing my API on a stick is I was looking around to see where I could install the equipment.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't the typical warehouse where you can just install it under the truss.
Right.
It was really busy. Sometimes you had cranes going under the ceiling, so you couldn't really. I even had, I would have to coordinate with the crew on site to bring my tripod up because they had a crane. So
and was it moving?
They would have to know
the crane was moving across the area.
Yeah, sometimes not everywhere. Like some cranes were not active, but some of them were.
Okay. So
I'll have to be careful with that. But sometimes I had to find alternate solutions to mount the APs. At one location, they had a cable tray. So we're gonna lower down the AP from the cable tray. At another location, we're going to install it on the wall with a 90-degree bracket. At another location, it's going to be under the ceiling. So I took advantage of that AP on a stick to study exactly how I could install the access points,
right,
and take pictures so I could later on document it in the documentation.
Yeah, and I think it's important while you're doing that is to talk to the people on site, right, the IT people, because while maybe the first time they've installed, and let's say this is an existing environment, they've installed access points. Maybe where they installed it the first time, they're now saying, you know what, that's not even a good spot because I can't service that access point. I can't get to that location anymore because after they've put in conveyor belts and machinery, they can't move that machinery to get to the access point. And so they might ask you, hey, can we place this access point somewhere else that is not 45 feet high, maybe 25 feet high, and can we get signal to the places that we need it, where if we're going to move the height of that AP. And so that's perfect for AP on a stick. And again, always goes back to increasing the accuracy of the predictive model, because the predictive, we're looking at it in 2D, right? From top down, we just won't see certain things on the floor plan. Some floor plans just don't have all the details. And that's, if you were to predictively place access points, maybe where you placed it is not even an ideal location to place that. Because like you said, François, there's a crane there, right? You're not going to put an access point where the crane's going to hit it.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't necessarily have this information, like you said, when you look at the 2D floor plans. Even though, you know what, I'm working on a project right now where it's a little bit different. Maybe we can do an episode on that. But the warehouse is not ready yet. They just that's just the initial floor plans before they build the warehouse.
Yeah.
But they provided, and I love when they do that, they provided the ceiling floor plans.
Yeah.
So you know where it's going to be ceiling tiles, where it's not. So you have a better idea of what the ceiling looks like, even though you're not on site.
Yeah, and generally that's where you ask for all the floor, like the architectural diagrams, and that'll show you the heights of the ceiling, where the trusses are, if there's different elevations of the ceiling there, if there's a different height, what type of ceiling tile is it, and from the ceiling tile, what's the height above the ceiling tile to wherever the truss is. Multiple different things that you would have to consider. And even when you're doing on the AP on a stick, when you place your access point in one of those locations, that's where you could try to measure some of that reflection or diffraction, because then you'll start noticing, wow, this signal travels quite the distance that I didn't think it would, and probably due to whatever metal or other obstruction that might be extending that signal, right? Even a cable tray could do something like that.
Yeah, and some we don't think about that often either, but sometimes the concrete floor can reflect the signal as well.
Yeah.
Especially if you're using like external antennas with like some angles towards the floors, sometimes you'll see that.
Yeah, and if we go into the antennas, that's another reason to do predictive, right? Maybe you're using a new antenna that you're not sure of how it looks like in the real world. And so if you've got an environment, so the last one I did bring warehouse antennas because we were considering a different design where it would minimize the amount of cabling. And so we played around with using Cisco access points with a DART connector and the RPTNC connector. So I had two antennas connected to one AP, and that would also eliminate a lot of APs that they would have to purchase. And so what we did is we tried one design where on my tripod I had two antennas connected to it, and then we tested signal on either side of that antenna to see how far the signal would go. And we used a scanner. I didn't use a Sidekick. I was just actually using the scanner that I connected to my AP, and was trying to see, all right, what's the threshold here? How far can I go in an aisle and still get a good signal, and where the antenna can also hear the device.
So how far did you go?
I think I got to around 200 feet. Wow. I was maybe short 20 feet, because by the time I got to the end of the aisle, the signal was, I think, around negative 72, which I wasn't fully comfortable with, because if I look at how people walk, they would have to go around an aisle. So I wasn't sure if the scanner would roam properly. And I didn't have enough tripods to try to test, on another aisle. But also some of that could be how I had the angle of the antenna, right? So maybe if I had pointed it down more, maybe I could have leveraged reflection off the floor to try to get some signal. But that's why you do those AP on a sticks, is to try to get those measurements down pretty accurately. So in your predictive, you could compare that and go, all right, here's what I got doing the AP on a stick. Let me try to reflect that into the design, right? With those external antennas.
All right. So we talked about the why. Let's talk about the how a little bit. How do we do AP on a stick? How do we figure out what tripod to use and all of that? Because that's questions we have often.
Yeah.
And they come back all the time. On Twitter or Slack, it's people asking us which type of equipment we use and how do we do it and all of this.
I would say before we get started on that, we do have a course that we go into very good detail on doing the practical part of these surveys. So if you go to courses.cleartosend.net, we do actually go into a lot of this detail, setting it up and how you can actually do it as well. Just wanted to mention that to everyone.
And that's why we created the course too, right? The course is a great resource, and we also have, like in the course, you have a list of all the equipment we use for different type of surveys. So you can, if you want to have a thorough list, you can check it out.
Yep.
What I do usually is look at the ceiling height. So usually when I talk to the customer initially, I try to understand, how high the ceiling is, and then depending on that, I would use different tripod. In my case, the ceilings were 7.5 meters, which is I think 24 feet. I want to say, or maybe a little bit over that, 25 feet.
Yep.
And so. I used a tripod that goes up to 7.3 meters. which was fine for my environment, because I wasn't going all the way up under the ceiling. I was going, the highest point that I was going was like the truss under the ceiling.
Yeah.
So I was able to go using that tripod, which is a Manfrotto tripod. We can add the reference in the show notes. And I really like the tripod. It's really good for warehouses because it's sturdy, like it's legit. So when it's heavy, it's 10 kilos, but when you install it, you're pretty confident it's really solid.
Yeah.
And then I on top of it, I would just install the Wi-Fi stand. I use the adapter that they have for painter pole to be able to fit the Wi-Fi stand inside the opening on the Manfrotto pole, and in order to have everything centered on the center of gravity of the tripod. And then I just install the equipment. For the survey I did, I used a missed access point, and then I was using a down tilt omnidirectional antenna from Axeltex, which was good for my environment.
Yeah.
I was really happy with the performance of it. It works really well if you have like higher ceilings, but like pretty open space areas. So that's kind of like what I was dealing with.
Okay.
So I would, and then I would just bring that all the way up at the proper height.
Yeah.
And then work around it. So yeah, it worked really well. I didn't have any problems. And what I also like to do is I also like to bring a smaller tripod, just in case I need to do office areas as well. And so I can have like a smaller tripod, that's easier to move around if I want to do that in the offices areas. One thing I don't like with tripod, and I'm not sure if I'm the only one to not like, but I'm not a big fan of casters. Mm-hmm. So usually I don't use casters on my tripods. I prefer to just lift them and move them around. I just find it a little hassle to deal with it. So that's just one piece of equipment I don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
I just carry my tripod.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I want the casters so I don't have to carry it. I just move it.
Yeah.
The other thing with, so the stability is the most important thing, right? You don't want something to fall on anyone. And with the caster wheels that I have, there's a locking mechanism, so it stays pretty stable. I mean, you don't need that if you don't have caster wheels, but I mean, if you have caster wheels, it's nice to lock it in place so it doesn't roll away or someone doesn't move it, and it stays in that single position. And I just use one tripod that actually goes up to 18 feet. Any higher, I would probably recommend using a lift or a cherry picker and somehow attaching your antenna and your AP there. But of course, use the AP and antenna you intend to use in your environment. That's also important.
Yeah, and that's sometimes something that's challenging. Like, how do you attach the AP and the antenna on top of the pole or on top of the on the skyjack or whatnot?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, over the years, I've used different techniques. Some antennas it depends on the AP and the antenna, but sometimes I had, the space in the Wi-Fi stand to actually sneak the antenna underneath the AP.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to attach the antenna to the pole.
Yep.
So you could install the antenna like right underneath the Wi-Fi stand to the pole. I think that's what you did in your case.
Yeah, I attached mine to the pole, and I was lucky that I had the stability there still because the pole was thick enough to use the what are they called, like a U-clip. So it took me time to I had to use a wrench to or pliers to tighten it and make sure it didn't move, right? I didn't want that sliding down after I put it up. Well, I didn't have to put it that high. I probably put it at like 8 feet. But I used the mounts that came with the antenna. I could have used something a little bit shorter, but because the mounts extended out pretty far, maybe a foot. But you can get creative, at least with an AP on a stick, of how you try to mount that, either using zip ties, Velcro, Just to be safe, maybe zip ties would be better so it just doesn't fall off.
Yeah, I would say, like, as a word of advice, try to keep the weight as minimal as possible. Yeah, and then try to keep the weight as centered to the pole as much as you can. In my case, like, I was using this Mist AP32E, which is not too heavy, which was nice. And then the antennas are usually not that heavy either. So I wasn't dealing with a lot of weight, so I didn't have any issue there. But sometimes if you're dealing with, like, the big Cisco APs and then some of the bigger antenna, you might have a little bit more weight.
That was my problem. I had a 2802E. And so if you've seen those things, they kind of have a heat sink on the back, right? And so it is heavy. And so I would see a slight tilt, especially if I had one antenna attached on one side. But so I also had extensions to go higher, but the extensions were pretty stable. Like, I have one that's pretty much all kind of metal, and then a Manfrotto extension that is all aluminum but very solid. And so at that I went 14 feet high, which was pretty stable, and didn't cause any issues for me.
Yeah, I guess we'll put pictures so you guys see what we're talking about. Another pro tip I could give is, if you have a telescopic pole, what you can also do is play with the orientation of those telescopic sections. Sometimes you can pivot them around to make sure that the pole stays straight.
Yeah.
So that's something I do as well. So as I go up, I see if it's starting to lean left or right, and then I pivot that tying section. Mm-hmm. So when I tie the pole, it brings it back where I want it to be. So that's a little pro tip you can use and play with if you're using telescopic poles.
Yeah, and just be careful, like, bringing those poles up or down in the middle of a warehouse, because with the weight at the top, if you aren't paying attention and you loosen the tripod, it could just come falling down pretty fast.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about that. We talked about the why, some of the equipment, some of the how we set it up. We didn't talk much about the Skyjack, but Skyjacks are a very nice way also to bring the equipment very high up. We talked about that a lot in the course, I guess.
Yeah, we'll list the equipment. Skyjack we don't want to talk about too much because I don't typically operate those, as I try to avoid those as much as possible. But why don't we talk about after the fact, after you do the AP on a stick? What do you do, Francois?
Yeah, and I found this part really interesting. What I usually like to do is I take all of the AP on the stick measurements that I've done, and then I try to incorporate that data into my model, right? So I would study, for instance, I will study like a rack and how one rack is attenuating the signal, and I'll try to model that back into my design. So usually the way I would do that is I would have ECA open on my laptop, my design, my predictive model open, and then on my tablet I would have like the AP on the stick work that I've done, and then I kind of study how it looks, and then I try to represent it into the model. So I would change the attenuation of my attenuation elements to try to have the same information. And I found this interesting because sometimes you're surprised. You're like, oh, I thought it was more. I thought it was less. And then you kind of learn different things depending on the environment. And then once you worked on the different sections, you should have your predictive model that looks like what you've measured on site, and it's a nice way to round everything up. And then if you need to add APs, you can actually add APs and see how the signal will propagate in the environment, and it's much more accurate than just guessing or using the default values that you would have in the software.
Yeah, you just be guessing, right, using the math on the software and whatever attenuation you're using, and that's why we do the AP on a stick, is to make that predictive more accurate. And whether you want to do an AP on a stick for a whole environment, I mean, that's up to you. It does take a lot of time, but generally I'm doing AP on a stick in the areas where I find most challenging. so for me, if it's like a multi-level modular where everything looks the same and inventory is the same, I won't do the whole thing. I'll just do a portion of it, maybe a couple of aisles and then above and below it, just to get signal of how much propagates up a level and down a level. And then that's how I can determine kind of the accuracy, like merging it, like you mentioned, the AP on a stick data with a predictive, and then actually seeing the real measurement, right? And so you just want to keep in mind like what power transmit level you're using in your predictive, and maybe you want to replicate that on your AP on a stick as well.
Yeah, and to answer your question that you're probably asking yourself, no, there's no automatic way to do this yet. That would be awesome, but that's a manual process. So yeah, you kind of have to do the process manually.
Yeah, it's a bit time consuming, but I think the results are much more worth it because there's not so much guesswork, right? You can have confidence in that report that you say, here's how many APs you need and where and why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's pretty much what I've done. And then in my case, because I also took a lot of pictures and I tested quite a bit of locations because they had, I was explaining they had different layouts in the plant. I actually had a lot of pictures as well that I could reuse for my documentation, and I think it's going to make it easier for the installation.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I've started doing that as well, as taking a lot more pictures, especially with the AP on a stick. Like, is that what you mean? Where you have it, so you can take a picture of the location. Like, here's where I want to mount it on this location. Maybe this pole maybe it has a marking on it. You can tell. You can say, hey, L bracket, for example, here, and anything to make the installers' lives a little bit more easier. Otherwise, they'll just guess on how you want it installed.
Yeah, and it's also I also do it for me, so I remember what I've done when I do my documentation, because when I'm on site, I'm always like, oh, I'm gonna remember.
Oh yeah, you're not gonna remember. I do the same thing, François. Like way more pictures than I need, and a lot of us will use like our phone, right? But I find I just use Ekahau to do that and just create a note. I'll take a picture and I'll even just so I use my iPad and I'll dictate what goes into the note. I don't even write it. I mean, you could write it now with the Apple Pen, but I just turn on the mic and I say whatever I want, and I just move on. Like, right, I have all the notes quickly there, and then you can pull it up in a report just for your sake, right? The documentation sake of like where you wanted things.
And not to plug the course again, but if you get the course, you get a script that extract all of these pictures from your account.
Yeah, and I use that script to help dump that into a file for people to reference.
I use that all the time too. It's so easy. It's nice. Yeah.
So I mean, that's
and something.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say something else I do when I take pictures. I try to always keep the same orientation. So if I ever have to export them in reports, I don't have to worry.
You don't have to worry about cropping and flipping images to fit. It works well with the script of the template. Cool. I mean, that's pretty much like what we really just wanted to talk about our previous jobs, the projects that we were working on, and kind of share what we've walked into, why we would do an AP on a stick versus just doing predictive. And we'll probably have more to share after, because some of these projects aren't even finished. Like I'll probably share what I find about outdoor, because outdoor could be just open space, and you can do a predictive on an open space, but I want to see how accurate it is on the predictive with a certain AP model.
Yeah. All right. Awesome.
All right. That was a good discussion, because we haven't even talked about our projects. We've been both busy, and so this is the first time we actually talk about what we've been working on.
I actually spent the week in a hospital doing some measurements as well, to be able to do a predictive model that's more accurate. So I actually did kind of the same work, but in a hospital environment.
Okay.
Which was interesting as well.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about that.
Cool. Well, Thanks, François, for joining me here, as we're both like in the middle of things. I'm still traveling. I think you just got back, so just wanted to record something quick before I get back on the road.
Awesome. Well, good luck on your survey tomorrow.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. All right, and enjoy the California weather.
Oh, I will. You know I will.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. Check out the show notes. We'll share some pictures, and then if you wanna, get a lot more information on the practical side of things, you can check out the course we built with Rowell. And then if you have questions, don't hesitate to leave comments on the show notes or hit us on Twitter @ClearToSend.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.